Hola, ¿qué tal? ¿Cómo estás? Welcome back to Spanish Lessons with Professor Jason. I've finally gotten around to preparing a lesson on the differences between the Spanish prepositions por and para, a topic that many of you have been requesting over the past months and years, and one that typically gives learners of Spanish quite a difficult time. But why is that? Well, obviously the two words are similar, por, para, but beyond that, they're often both translated into English as the preposition for, F-O-R, but they're not interchangeable. So in the same way that English speakers have difficulties deciding whether to choose between ser and estar to translate the verb to be, they have a hard time choosing between por and para for F-O-R. But one important thing to point out with por and para is that they also have other uses and meanings. They don't always equal for. Okay, they can be different prepositions, through, by, in, to, etc. We'll get to all that. My approach in this lesson is going to be to run down the most common uses of each, beginning with para, moving on to por, and then to provide plenty of examples so that you can figure out which one to use. All right, now I mentioned I'm going to start with para. Why is that? Well, I think for me, the uses of para seem to be fewer and more specific, easier to remember. And so what I teach my students is, if they can rule out para, then they're probably safe picking por. So let's begin by taking a closer look at the uses of para. Here we go. The most common uses of para have to do with, first of all, expressing a destination in space, like going to the beach, going to Mexico, etc. Designating the recipient of something, usually an object. For example, this letter is for Maria, or this present is for you. 3, to say what the intended purpose of an action is, such as she works to pay the bills. In this sense, it means in order to pay them. Or finally, to refer to deadlines in time. For example, the assignment is due on Friday. If you think about it, these four main uses of para all have to do with or focus on moving toward a final destination or target. Okay? So on this slide, we have some examples of how para might be used to express destination in space. So for example, we might say, vamos para la playa después del almuerzo. Or, dijeron que no hay vuelos para Madrid hoy. ¿Para dónde va este tren? Ese tren va para Córdoba. Or, Jorge sale para Cuernavaca el viernes. So here we see para used as to, really, to someplace. The English translation's in white. This slide shows examples of using para to designate the recipient of something. Esta carta es para María. Estos zapatos son para mi hija. Luis compró unos dulces para su mujer. Ese regalo no es para ti. Moving on, we can see some examples of how to use para to express the intended purpose of an action. For example, ella trabaja para pagar las cuentas. Ellos estudian para salir bien en los exámenes. Yo te llamo después para pasarte a la dirección. Para llegar temprano, deberías tomar la carretera. Examples of using para to express the intended purpose of an action. If you look at these, it says to pay the bills, to do well, but it really sort of means in order to pay the bills, in order to do well, so that they will do well, so that I can give you the address, that type of idea, in order to. And finally, on our final main usage of para, we're talking about referring to deadlines in time. Examples. ¿Cuándo tenemos que entregar la asignación? Es para el viernes. It's due on Friday. ¿Cuándo necesitas que te devuelva los libros? Los necesito para el lunes que viene. I need them by or on next Monday. Or tenemos que terminar el proyecto para finales de mayo. We have to finish the project by late May. Now what I've done on this slide is to list 3 additional uses of para that don't fit neatly into those previously mentioned 4 categories. So we're also going to use para to express that an ability is surprising in a person with certain characteristics. For example, para un niño escribe muy bien. He writes very well for a child. Or para un americano entiende bastante de fútbol. For an American, he knows a lot about soccer. We also use para to introduce someone's opinion or perspective in the sense of, as far as that person's concerned, para mi padre, eso es simplemente una excusa. As far as my father's concerned, that's just an excuse. O para ella, tu actitud es inaceptable. She finds, or as far as she's concerned, your attitude is unacceptable. Finally, we use para also to express that someone works for or is employed by someone else or a company. Trabajo para mi cuñado. I work for my brother-in-law. Or Ana trabaja para una agencia del gobierno. She works for a government agency. Okay, now that we've talked about the primary uses of para, let's take a closer look at the most common uses of por. Just like we saw with para, por does not always translate as for. It's used to express other ideas as well. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the most common ways that the preposition por is used in Spanish. Here we go. Now we saw earlier that para is used to express movement to a specific destination. Now when it comes to movement, por, on the other hand, is used to express less exact concepts such as through, along, by, around, etc. Let's look at some examples. Juan salió por la puerta trasera. Juan went out through the back door. Or ellos siempre se pasean por el parque. They always take walks around or through the park. Julia vende helados por el barrio. She sells ice cream around the neighborhood. Vamos por aquí. Es más rápido. Let's go this way. It's just sort of a general movement. Okay, it's not the destination. Okay, whereas para is used to describe the intended purpose of an action, por or even porque are used to express the reason or cause of an action, basically to explain why or because why, if you will, something is done. In this sense, the uses of por and para can seem pretty close, and it basically depends on whether the speaker wants to stress why something's done, which would be por, or what the intended purpose or outcome is, which is para. So in a way, por focuses more on the before, the motive, while para really stresses the after, the effect of the action. Okay, so here's some examples. Llegamos tarde por el tráfico. We were late because of the traffic, or due to the traffic. Cancelaron el partido por la lluvia. Did they cancel the game because of the rain, due to the rain? Te van a castigar por lo que hiciste. They're going to punish you for what you did. Or necesito estudiar porque tengo examen. Necesito estudiar porque tengo examen. In other words, the exam is the reason why I'm studying. Okay? These are examples of using por as the motive or reason for an action. Now we saw earlier that para is used to indicate specific deadlines or due dates in time, when something has to be done. When we think about using the word for in connection with time in English, we're usually talking about duration or time span. In these cases, when we want to express how long something will last or take, Spanish uses por for four, or even omits the preposition altogether, as we can see in the first example here, right? Ella va a estudiar por 3 horas, or I can simply say, ella va a estudiar 3 horas. Estuvimos en ese pueblo por 2 semanas. Estuvimos en ese pueblo 2 semanas. We were in that town for 2 weeks. ¿Por cuántas horas trabajaron ayer? ¿Por cuántas horas trabajaron ayer? Trabajamos 7 horas y media. So these are examples of using por for duration, how long something will last in time. Now we also use por to say that somebody did something for another person, in the sense that they did it on behalf of someone else to benefit them, or in the place or stead of another person. So for example, todo lo que ella hace es por su familia. Everything she does is for her family, for the benefit of her family. Quiero votar por el mejor candidato. Mi amigo Esteban trabajó por mí ayer. In other words, he worked in my place. I was sick or I had another commitment. Entonces mi amigo Esteban trabajó por mí ayer. He doesn't work for me. I'm not his employer. He worked instead of me. He took my place that day. Substitution. Another common use of the preposition por in Spanish is to talk about payments or exchanges. For example, ¿cuánto pagaste por esas camisas? Pagué 300 pesos por las dos. ¿Cuánto me darías por este reloj? No te daría nada por él. Está muy viejo. So we're talking about a payment or an exchange. What would you pay for that? What would you give for that? Okay? Okay, and on these next 2 slides, I introduce 6 more uses of por, just kind of a random sampling that probably aren't primary uses like we've been talking about. All right, first of all, we also use por to express rates, units, or frequencies. Okay? El límite de velocidad aquí es 100 kilómetros por hora. Or la fábrica produce 1000 coches por semana, the frequency of production. We also use por to indicate the means by which something is done. In this case, we often talk about the means of travel or sending something, means of transport. No me gusta viajar por tren. I don't like traveling by train. Or ella mandó el paquete por avión. She sent the package by plane, used airmail. We also use por to indicate the agent of passive constructions. Ese poema fue escrito por Pablo Neruda. That poem was written by Pablo Neruda. We use por to indicate the object of an errand when we want to say we went somewhere for something, to get something. Fui al mercado por pan y leche. I went to the store for bread and milk. Por is the preposition we use for the equivalent of for in the English expression, thank you for something. Sort of related to that idea of exchange we saw a couple slides back. Gracias por tu ayuda. Gracias por venir. Thanks for coming. And then finally, we're going to use por to express approximate time. So expressions like por la mañana, por la tarde, por la noche, without saying exactly what time we're talking about. Mi hermano trabaja por la tarde. He works afternoons. Alright, so you've seen the most common uses of para and the most frequent uses of por. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put up on the next slide a little bit of a quiz. Okay, and I want you to decide whether you should use por or para to fill in the blanks on the slide. Alright, go ahead and pause the video now and start it when you're ready to look at the answers. Don't start until you're ready to see those answers though, okay? Alright, here we go. Take the quiz now. Okay, so here's your fill in the blank quiz. I'm going to talk you through these and give you the version in English, and then you decide whether it should be por or para. Now you're going to hear that they're not all for. You're going to hear different prepositions, but it's always por or para en español. Alright, number one, I bought this book for you. You're the recipient of this gift. Number two, we ride our bikes around the city. Not to the city, but we ride our bikes around town. Number three, the homework is due next Tuesday. We have to finish it and turn it in by next Tuesday, the deadline. Number four, I started to say it in Spanish. Number four, I'm not going to pay that much for or in exchange for that CD. Number five, did you vote for Obama or McCain? Number six, they work in order to pay their tuition. So they're working to pay their tuition. Number seven, when are we going to Mexico again? We're talking about a destination. When are we going to Mexico again? Number eight, at my job, they pay me $10 per hour. That's the rate that they pay me at. They pay me $10 per hour. Number nine, look at number 9 and number 10. Notice they're almost identical, okay? We're talking about a resort or a hotel in number 9 and 10. We stayed an extra day to see the concert, or in order to see the concert, number 9. Number 10, we stayed an extra day at the resort because of the discount that they offered. We stayed an extra day because of or due to the discount. Number 11. Jaime works for his fiancé's father. In other words, his fiancé's father employs him. Doesn't sound like a very good arrangement to me. Number 12, similar but not the same. Yesterday, I worked for a sick colleague. I worked for in place of, substituting a sick colleague. Alright? Ready to start up the video and see how you did? Okay. Okay, now if you started the video again, that means you're ready to see the answers. Let's go ahead and take a look at the answers to the quiz and see how you've done applying the rules for using por and para. Here are the answers. Alright, so here are those answers to the quiz. Number 1, compré este libro para ti. Para because of the recipient factor. Number 2, andamos de bicicleta por la ciudad. Approximate movement, through and around. Number 3, la tarea es para el próximo martes. Para because we're talking about the deadline. 4, no voy a pagar tanto por ese CD. In exchange for the CD. Number 5, excuse me. ¿Votaste por Obama o McCain? ¿Votaste por Obama o McCain? Number 6. Ellos trabajan para pagar su matrícula, in order to pay the tuition. Number 7. Cuando vamos para México de nuevo, we use para for destinations, going to somewhere. Number 8. En mi trabajo me pagan $10 por hora, the rate of payment, units. Number 9. Nos quedamos un día más para ver el concierto, in order to, the purpose of the action. Number 10. Nos quedamos un día más por el descuento. In other words, the discount was the reason or the motive behind or that caused us to stay an extra day. Number 11. Jaime trabaja para el padre de su novia. Use para when you're talking about someone working for, being employed by someone else. And number 12. Ayer trabajé por un compañero enfermo. Use por for substitutions or doing something on someone else's behalf. How'd you do? Alright, well that concludes my presentation on the different uses of the Spanish prepositions por and para. I know that's been a lot of information. I hope it was helpful. Keep rewinding and practicing until it starts to make sense, okay? As always, I welcome your questions, comments, and suggestions, so please take a minute, leave a comment, and let me know what you thought about this particular video lesson, alright? This has been Professor Jason once again. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you at the next lesson. Hasta pronto. Ciao.